The widow's boarding house smelled of lavender soap and biscuits, but Violet Pemberton could only smell the sharp edge of her own panic as her Aunt Constance smoothed down her hair for the third time in as many minutes, fingers trembling with excitement that Violet absolutely did not share. "He will be here any moment now," Constance said, her voice carrying that breathless quality it always did when she believed she was doing something terribly clever. "Uncle Bernard swears Finn Hawthorne is the finest man to ever come down from the high country, and you know your uncle does not give praise lightly." Violet knew no such thing. Uncle Bernard praised his horse, his hunting dogs, and the quality of his bourbon with equal enthusiasm, and she suspected his judgment of men who drove cattle down from the mountains each spring was colored more by whiskey shared around campfires than any genuine assessment of character. She stood in the parlor of her aunt's boarding house, her dress pressing uncomfortably against her soft middle, her hands clasped so tightly before her that her knuckles had gone white. The afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains, turning dust motes into tiny accusers that danced in the still air. "Aunt Constance, this is a terrible idea," Violet said, not for the first time that day, and not with any real hope that it would change what was about to happen. "I'm a seamstress. I have my work, my room, my life. I do not need a husband, and I certainly do not need one procured through trickery and meddling." Constance waved her hand as though swatting away an irritating fly. "It is not trickery, dear girl. It is opportunity. You are 23 years old, and you spend all your days bent over needle and thread. When do you ever meet anyone? When do you ever go anywhere beyond the dress shop and the Sunday service?" The words stung because they were true. Violet had built a small, safe life for herself in Sacramento Valley, where the foothills rolled golden in summer and green in winter, where the town of Utica sat like a comfortable cat in the sun. She had her skill with a needle, her reputation for fine work, and the respect of the women who brought her their cloth and their coin. She did not have romance, had never really expected it, and had convinced herself over the years that she did not want it. Romance was for women who were delicate and lovely, women who could wear a dress without feeling like a sausage in its casing, women who turned heads when they walked into a room instead of making people quickly look away. "He will take one look at me and make his excuses," Violet said quietly. "You have described me to Uncle Bernard, and Uncle Bernard has no doubt painted some kinder picture to this mountain man of yours, and when he arrives and sees the reality, we will all sit here drinking tea while he counts the minutes until he can flee." Before Constance could respond with whatever platitude she had prepared, there came a knock at the door, 3 solid raps that seemed to echo through the whole house. Violet's stomach dropped like a stone down a well. Constance's face lit up like a lantern, and she practically skipped to the door, leaving Violet standing alone in a paralyzed tableau of dread. The door swung open, and Violet heard a man's voice, deep and warm as summer thunder rolling over the hills. "Mrs. Aldridge, I am Finn Hawthorne. I believe your husband mentioned we might meet this afternoon." "Oh, yes, do come in," Constance gushed, and then she was ushering him into the parlor, and Violet found herself face to face with the man her aunt and uncle had decided would make a suitable match. He was enormous. That was her first thought, immediate and overwhelming. Finn Hawthorne stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the doorway, and arms that strained the fabric of his shirt as though the cotton itself was intimidated by the muscle beneath. His hair fell past his collar in dark waves that looked like they had been combed by wind and weather rather than any civilized brush, and his face was all strong lines and weathered tan, a face that had seen sun and snow and everything between. He wore simple clothes, work-worn denim and a shirt that had been mended more than once, but he wore them with the unconscious ease of a man who had never worried about what anyone thought of his appearance. He looked at her, and his expression changed so completely and so suddenly that Violet felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes, green-brown like the hills in spring, went wide. His mouth, which had been curved in a polite smile of greeting, fell open slightly. He stared at her as though she had appeared in a bolt of lightning, as though she were something miraculous and unexpected, and for a long moment he seemed entirely incapable of speech. "My God," he said finally, his voice rough with something that sounded almost like wonder. "You are absolutely beautiful." Violet felt heat flood her face, felt her hands go clammy, felt every instinct screaming at her to make some joke, to deflect, to protect herself from whatever game this was. But Finn Hawthorne was not looking at her the way men looked at women they were flattering for sport. He was looking at her the way a man looked at a sunset he had climbed a mountain to see, with open awe and perfect sincerity. Thank you, she managed, the words barely audible even to her own ears. That's very kind of you to say. Kind. He shook his head slowly, as though waking from a dream. No, madam, kindness has nothing to do with it. I'm stating a fact as plain as the sky being blue. Constance was beaming so brightly that Violet thought her aunt might actually burst into song. Why don't you both sit down? I will bring tea and those little cakes I made this morning. You two should become acquainted. She bustled off toward the kitchen with suspicious speed, leaving Violet and Finn standing in the parlor like two people who had just met at the edge of a cliff and were not entirely sure what to do next. Finn moved first, gesturing toward the settee with a grace that seemed at odds with his size. May I? He asked, and when Violet nodded, he sat down carefully, as though afraid the furniture might object to his presence. Violet perched on the edge of a chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing through possible explanations for his reaction. Perhaps he was simple-minded, perhaps he had poor vision, perhaps this was some elaborate joke that Uncle Bernard had put him up to, though she could not imagine what the punchline might be. Finn leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his attention fixed on her with an intensity that was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. I should be honest with you, Miss Pemberton. I came here today because Bernard would not stop talking about his niece, and because I have learned that Bernard generally knows what he is talking about when it comes to people. But I did not expect— He trailed off, shaking his head again. I did not expect you. What did you expect? Violet asked, trying to keep her voice level, trying not to let him hear the tremor of uncertainty beneath the words. I suppose I expected someone ordinary, Finn said simply. Someone pleasant enough, someone I might be able to talk to for an hour without wanting to throw myself out a window. Instead, I walk through that door and find myself looking at the most stunning woman I have ever seen, and now I am sitting here trying to remember how to form complete sentences. Violet felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry, not in front of the stranger, not when she still did not understand what was happening. Mr. Hawthorne, I do not know what my uncle told you, but I am not— I'm hardly— Hardly what? Finn asked gently. Hardly the kind of woman who makes a man forget his own name when he looks at her? Hardly the kind of woman with eyes like violets in spring and a face that belongs in paintings? Because from where I am sitting, Miss Pemberton, you are exactly that kind of woman. I am fat, Violet blurted out, the word hanging in the air between them like a stone she had thrown. I am not dainty or delicate or any of the things that women are supposed to be. I am a seamstress who sits too much and eats too many of my aunt's cakes, and I have never been the sort of woman that men look at twice. Finn was quiet for a moment, his expression turning serious, the playfulness draining out of his features like water from a broken bowl. When he spoke again, his voice was low and fierce. Then those men were fools, and they did not deserve to look at you even once. You are beautiful, Violet Pemberton. You are beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful, in the way that rivers are beautiful, in the way that things with substance and presence and reality are beautiful. I spend most of my year in the high country, and I have seen more stars than I can count, and I am telling you that walking into this room and seeing you was worth coming down from those mountains. Violet could not speak. Her throat had closed up entirely, and she was gripping the arms of her chair so hard that she thought the wood might crack. Finn held her gaze for another moment, and then he seemed to realize that he had overwhelmed her, because he sat back and let out a long breath. I am coming on too strong, he said, a rueful smile tugging at his mouth. My mother used to tell me I had all the subtlety of a bull moose in mating season. Let me start over. My name is Finn Hawthorne. I am 30 years old. I spend most of my time in the mountains tending cattle and horses, and I come down to the valley twice a year to help with the drives and to remember what civilization looks like. I like clear water, good horses, and the smell of pine trees. I do not like crowded places, people who lie, or beans that have been cooked to mush. Your turn. The sudden shift, the simple directness of his introduction, broke through Violet's paralysis. She felt a surprised laugh bubble up in her chest, and she let it out, shaky but real. My name is Violet Pemberton. I'm 23 years old. I'm a seamstress, and I spend most of my time creating dresses for other people to look beautiful in. I like the feel of good fabric, the sound of rain on the roof, and blackberry preserves. I do not like dishonesty, loud noises, or people who think they know what is best for me better than I do myself." "That would include your aunt and uncle, I imagine," Finn said, his smile widening into something warm and conspiratorial. "That would very much include my aunt and uncle," Violet agreed, and felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Constance returned then with a tray laden with tea things and small frosted cakes, and she set it down on the low table between them with the air of a general positioning artillery. "Here we are. Please enjoy. I have some things to attend to upstairs, so you two just make yourselves comfortable." She disappeared again before either of them could protest, and Violet found herself alone with Finn Hawthorne once more, this time with the social obligation of tea to navigate. Finn reached for the pot and poured with surprising delicacy for a man with hands that looked like they could bend iron. "How do you take it?" he asked. "With honey, if there is any." "There is." He prepared her cup the way she liked it, then fixed his own with nothing but tea, strong and dark. He handed her the cup and their fingers brushed just for a moment, and Violet felt something electric run up her arm at the contact. Finn's eyes met hers, and she knew he had felt it too. They drank their tea in silence for a moment, and then Finn said, "Tell me about your work. Do you enjoy being a seamstress?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before, not in that way, not as though her answer actually mattered. Most people asked what she charged, or how quickly she could complete a commission, or whether she could copy a design from a fashion plate. But Finn Hawthorne sat there with his teacup looking absurdly small in his large hands, and he watched her with those clear eyes, and he waited for her real answer. I do," Violet said slowly. "I like making things with my hands. I like taking flat pieces of cloth and turning them into something that has shape and purpose. I like when a woman comes to collect a dress I have made, and I can see in her face that she feels beautiful in it. There is satisfaction in that." "I imagine there is," Finn said. "I feel the same way about working with horses, taking something wild and frightened and helping it become something strong and steady, something that trusts you. It is good work. Your uncle says you live up in the mountains most of the year. Is it not lonely?" Finn considered this, tilting his head slightly. "Sometimes. But the loneliness of mountains is different from the loneliness of crowds. In the mountains, you are alone because there is no one around. In towns, you can be alone because no one sees you even when you are standing right in front of them. I prefer the first kind." Violet understood that more than she cared to admit. She had spent years being invisible in plain sight, the fat seamstress whom people needed but did not notice, whom they spoke to but did not really see. She took another sip of her tea and found herself asking, "What made you agree to come here today?" "Truly?" Finn set down his cup and leaned back, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "Bernard caught me 2 days ago when I was in town buying supplies. He told me his niece was the finest woman in Sacramento Valley, that she was clever and skilled and deserved better than to spend her life alone just because the men in this town were too stupid to recognize quality when they saw it. He also mentioned that she was convinced no man would ever want her, and that if I could prove her wrong, I would be doing both her and myself a favor." "That sounds like Uncle Bernard," Violet said, not sure whether to be mortified or grateful. "He also said," Finn continued, his voice taking on a gentler tone, "that you had been hurt before, not by any one person, but by a lifetime of being overlooked. He said you had built walls around yourself, and that those walls were reasonable, but that they were also a shame, because behind them was someone worth knowing." Violet felt the tears threaten again, and this time she could not quite hold them back. One escaped, trailing down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. "I am sorry. I do not mean to be emotional." "Do not apologize." Finn's voice was firm. "You are allowed to feel things. That is part of being human." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily as Violet's defenses slowly crumbled. Finn told her about his life in the high country, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about the way the stars looked when there was no other light for miles. Violet told him about her work, about the women she sewed for, about the small pleasures of her days. He made her laugh with stories of ornery cattle and stubborn horses, and she surprised herself by telling him things she had never told anyone about her dreams of one day designing her own patterns instead of just copying others, about her fear that she had let her life become too small. When the light outside began to take on the golden quality of late afternoon, Finn stood reluctantly. "I should go. I am staying at the hotel on Main Street while the drive is being organized, but I will be in town for at least another week. May I call on you again?" Violet stood as well, her heart hammering in her chest. "I would like that." "Tomorrow?" he asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression, as though he feared she might refuse. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Finn smiled, a slow, brilliant smile that transformed his entire face, and then he took her hand in his and bowed over it with a courtliness that seemed both natural and slightly absurd coming from a mountain man in mended clothes. "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Pemberton." He left, and Violet stood in the parlor listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway and out the front door. The room seemed emptier without him, as though he had taken up more than just physical space. Constance appeared from upstairs with suspicious promptness, her face eager. "Well?" she demanded. "What did you think of him?" Violet sank back down into her chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "I think," she said slowly, "that he is either the kindest man I have ever met or the cruelest, and I do not yet know which." Constance's expression softened. "Oh, my dear girl, he is kind. I saw the way he looked at you when he first walked in. That was not politeness, that was not obligation, that was a man who had just seen something he had not known he was looking for." Violet wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe it so badly that it frightened her. But years of protection, years of guarding her heart against exactly this kind of hope, could not be undone in a single afternoon. She went to bed that night with her mind spinning, replaying every word, every look, every moment of that strange and wonderful and terrifying meeting. The next morning, Violet woke early and went through her usual routine with hands that would not quite stay steady. She dressed in her second-best dress, a dark blue cotton that she had made herself and that fit her well. She pinned her hair up carefully and allowed herself the smallest touch of rosewater at her wrists. Then she went downstairs to the dress shop where she worked, the small storefront owned by Mrs. Graham, a widow who appreciated fine needlework and did not mind that Violet was not the sort of woman who attracted customers through beauty alone. Mrs. Graham looked up from the counter when Violet entered, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Violet's appearance. "You look different this morning." "Do I?" Violet tried to sound casual as she hung up her shawl and moved to her workstation by the window. "You do. You look like a woman who has had something interesting happen. Care to share?" Violet hesitated, then found herself telling the whole story, from her aunt's meddling to Finn's arrival to his shocking declaration of her beauty. Mrs. Graham listened without interruption, and when Violet finished, the older woman nodded slowly. "And do you believe him?" Mrs. Graham asked. "I do not know," Violet admitted. "I want to, but I cannot understand why he would say such things if they were not true, yet I also cannot understand why they would be true." "Perhaps," Mrs. Graham said gently, "you are so accustomed to thinking poorly of yourself that you cannot imagine someone else thinking well of you. That is a cage, Violet, and it is one you built yourself." The words struck home, and Violet turned them over in her mind as she bent to her work. She was hemming a wedding dress for the banker's daughter, tiny, invisible stitches that would hold the fabric in place without being seen. It was painstaking work that required total concentration, but today her mind kept wandering to Finn Hawthorne, to the way he had looked at her, to the warmth in his voice when he spoke. At noon, there came a knock at the shop door, and Violet looked up to see Finn himself standing on the other side of the glass. He held his hat in his hands and wore an expression of hopeful uncertainty that made him look younger than his 30 years. Mrs. Graham raised her eyebrows and made a small shooing gesture toward the door. "Go on, then. Your work will keep." Violet set down her needle and opened the door, and Finn's face lit up when he saw her. "Miss Pemberton, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I thought perhaps you might join me for lunch. There's a place down by the river that sells sandwiches, and the day is fine." Violet glanced back at Mrs. Graham, who was now very deliberately not looking at them. "Go," Mrs. Graham said without turning around. You work too hard anyway." Violet fetched her shawl and joined Finn on the boardwalk, acutely aware of the way people looked at them as they walked through town. She could practically hear the thoughts. What is a man like that doing with a woman like her? But Finn seemed utterly oblivious to the stares. He walked beside her with easy confidence, his long strides shortened to match her pace, and he pointed out things as they went. A hawk circling overhead, a particularly fine horse tied outside the general store, the way the clouds were building up over the western hills. They bought sandwiches and apples from a cart and carried them down to the riverbank, where the water ran clear and fast over smooth stones. They sat on a fallen log in the shade of a willow tree, and Finn unwrapped his sandwich with the care of a man who had spent many meals eating alone and was grateful to have company. "Tell me something true about yourself," Finn said suddenly. "Something you do not usually tell people." Violet took a bite of her sandwich to buy herself time to think. "I'm afraid," she said finally, "that I have wasted my life, that I have let fear make all my decisions, and that one day I will wake up and realize I'm old and have never really lived at all." Finn was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "That is a hard thing to admit." "Your turn," Violet said. "Tell me something true." Finn looked out at the river, his expression turning distant. "I'm afraid that I am too rough for civilized life, that I have spent so much time alone in the mountains that I have forgotten how to be around people, that even if I found someone I wanted to build a life with, I would not know how to do it." They sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward, and ate their lunch to the sound of the river and the wind in the willow branches. When they had finished, Finn turned to her and said, "I want to see you again, not because your uncle asked me to, not out of kindness or obligation, but because I like you, because talking to you feels easy in a way that talking to people usually does not, because when I look at you, I see someone I want to know better." "I want that too," Violet said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "But I'm afraid, Finn. I'm afraid that this is too good to be true, that I will let myself believe in it, and then discover it was all a mistake." Finn reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and rough with calluses. "Then we will be afraid together, and we will take it one day at a time, and we will be honest with each other, and we will see what happens." It was the most reasonable and most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. Violet squeezed his hand and nodded, and they sat there by the river until the sun began its slow descent toward the western hills. Over the next week, Finn called on Violet every day. Sometimes he took her for walks through town, sometimes they sat in her aunt's parlor and talked, sometimes he came to the dress shop and sat quietly while she worked, content just to be in the same room. Violet found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She caught herself smiling at odd moments, humming while she sewed, staying awake at night replaying conversations in her head. Finn was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was gentle despite his size, thoughtful despite his rough edges, and he listened to her in a way that made her feel truly heard. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the seasons and the weather and the animals, and he made it sound like poetry. He asked her about her work, about her dreams, about her thoughts on everything from politics to religion to the best way to make bread. He treated her opinions as valuable, her presence as a gift, her company as something he actively sought rather than merely tolerated. But beneath the growing affection, Violet felt the constant whisper of doubt. She watched the way other women looked at Finn when they passed him on the street, their eyes lingering on his broad shoulders and handsome face. She knew what those women saw, and she knew what they must be thinking when they saw him with her. She tried to push the thoughts away, tried to believe what Finn had told her, but the doubts had deep roots. On the 8th day, Finn invited her to attend a dance at the town hall that evening. It was being held to celebrate the successful completion of the spring cattle drive, and everyone would be there. Violet's first instinct was to refuse, to invent some excuse, but she saw the hope in Finn's eyes and found herself agreeing before she could think better of it. She spent the afternoon in a state of mild panic, trying on and discarding 3 different dresses before settling on a deep green one that she had made the previous year and never had occasion to wear. It fit well, emphasizing her curves rather than trying to hide them, and the color brought out the violet of her eyes. She pinned her hair up in a style that was more elaborate than her usual practical bun, and she allowed herself a touch of color on her lips. When Finn arrived to collect her, the expression on his face made every moment of anxiety worthwhile. He stood in her aunt's doorway and simply stared at her, his mouth slightly open, and then he said, "Violet Pemberton, you are going to be the most beautiful woman at that dance, and I am going to be the luckiest man." Constance appeared behind Violet, beaming like the sun. "You two have a wonderful time. And Finn, you take good care of my niece." "I will guard her with my life," Finn said solemnly, and offered Violet his arm. They walked to the town hall through the warm spring evening, the air sweet with the smell of flowering trees. Other couples and families were heading the same direction, all dressed in their best clothes, and Violet felt the familiar tightening in her chest as people turned to look at them. But Finn walked with his head high and his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm, and he nodded politely to everyone they passed as though there was nothing unusual about them being together. The town hall was already crowded when they arrived, the space transformed with lanterns and garlands of spring flowers. A small band was setting up in one corner, and tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter, and Violet felt herself shrinking instinctively, wanting to fade into the background the way she always did at these events. But Finn kept her hand firmly tucked into the crook of his arm, and he led her through the crowd with purpose, stopping to greet people he knew from the cattle drive. He introduced her to everyone, his voice full of pride as he said her name, and Violet found herself shaking hands with cowboys and ranchers and townspeople who looked at her with varying degrees of curiosity and surprise. They found a spot near one of the windows, and Finn fetched her a cup of punch and a plate of small cakes. The band began to play, and couples moved onto the floor for the first dance. Finn turned to her, his hand extended. "May I have this dance, Miss Pemberton?" Violet felt her stomach drop. "I'm not a very good dancer," she said quietly. "I'm not graceful." Finn leaned down so that his words were for her alone. "I have seen you move, Violet. I have watched you walk and sit and work with your hands. You are graceful in ways that matter. But if you are worried about dancing, then we will not dance. We can just stand here and watch and enjoy each other's company. I did not bring you here to make you uncomfortable. I brought you here because I wanted to be with you." The words, the sincerity in his voice, the way he was giving her a choice without judgment, all of it conspired to make Violet braver than she felt. "I would like to try," she said, "if you do not mind that I might step on your feet." "You could step on my feet all night and I would count myself blessed," Finn said, and led her onto the floor. Dancing with Finn was nothing like Violet had imagined. He held her firmly but gently, his hand warm and sure at her waist, and he moved with surprising grace for such a large man. When she stumbled, he steadied her without comment. When she apologized, he shook his head and smiled. And when the music swelled and he spun her in a slow circle, she found herself laughing with pure, unexpected joy. They danced 3 dances in a row, and by the end of the third, Violet had forgotten to be self-conscious. She was breathless and flushed and happier than she could remember being in years. Finn's eyes never left her face, and the way he looked at her made her feel like the only woman in the room. After the third dance, they stepped outside for some air, finding a quiet spot on the side porch where the music was muffled and the stars were bright overhead. Violet leaned against the railing, her heart still racing, and Finn stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Thank you for tonight," Violet said softly. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much." "Thank you for coming with me," Finn replied, "and for trusting me." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Finn said, "Violet, I need to tell you something. The cattle drive is finished. Most of the men are heading back to their ranches or moving on to other work. I need to head back up to the mountains in a few days to check on my cabin and my stock." Violet felt something cold settle in her chest. Of course, she had known this was temporary, had known that Finn's life was in the mountains, not in the valley. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were 2 very different things. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "No," Finn said quickly, "I do not think you do. I'm going back to the mountains because I have to, because I have responsibilities there. But I'm not going back because I want to leave you. I'm going back because that is where I live, and because I need to take care of things before—" He paused, then continued, "before I can figure out what comes next." "What do you mean?" Violet asked, turning to face him. Finn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that was becoming familiar. "I mean that I have spent the last week and a half falling in love with you, Violet Pemberton. I mean that every moment I spend with you makes me want more moments. I mean that when I think about going back to my cabin, all I can think about is how empty it is going to feel without you there." Violet's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "You love me." "I do." Finn's voice was steady now, certain. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a short time, but I also know what I feel. I love your kindness and your humor and your talent. I love the way you think about things, the way you see the world. I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love looking at you, being near you, talking to you. I love you." Violet felt tears streaming down her face, hot and fast, and she could not seem to stop them. "I love you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I tried to protect myself, but I love you too." Finn reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. "Then we will figure this out. I do not know how yet, but we will. I promise you that." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Violet felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. She kissed him back, her hands gripping the front of his shirt, and for that moment nothing else existed but the two of them and the truth they had just spoken. They went back inside eventually, rejoining the dance, but everything had changed. Violet felt lighter, as though she had been carrying a great weight and had finally been allowed to set it down. Finn kept her close, his hand always finding hers, his attention always returning to her no matter who else tried to claim it. It was near the end of the evening when things began to unravel. Violet had gone to get them more punch, and she was standing near the refreshment table when she overheard a group of men talking nearby. She recognized them as some of the cattlemen who had come down with the drive, rough-looking men with sun-weathered faces and loud voices. "So Hawthorne finally showed up with his girl," one of them was saying. "Thought he was going to hide her away the whole time." "Can you blame him?" another replied, and there was laughter in his voice that made Violet's stomach clench. "She is not exactly a prize, is she? But I suppose when you spend most of your year alone in the mountains, any woman starts to look good." "He is just being kind," a third voice chimed in. "You know how Finn is. He probably felt sorry for her. Bernard mentioned his niece needed a confidence boost, and Finn is too soft-hearted to say no. He will let her down easy once he's back in the high country." "Well, he plays the part well. I will give him that. The way he looks at her, you would almost think he means it." More laughter, and Violet felt the world tilt sideways. The punch cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, splashing red liquid across the floor, but she barely noticed. She turned and pushed through the crowd, desperate for air, desperate to be anywhere but there. She made it outside and around the side of the building before the sobs came, great heaving gasps that shook her whole body. It had all been a lie. Of course it had. How could she have been so stupid? Finn had been acting out of kindness, out of obligation to her uncle, and she had let herself believe that someone like him could actually love someone like her. She heard footsteps behind her and knew it was Finn even before he spoke. "Violet? What happened? I saw you run outside and—" "Do not," she said, her voice sharp with pain. "Just do not." "Do not what?" "Violet, talk to me. What is wrong?" She whirled to face him, tears still streaming down her face. "I heard them. Those men, your friends from the cattle drive. They were talking about us, about how you are just being kind to the poor fat woman because my uncle asked you to. About how you will let me down gently once you are back in the mountains and away from your obligation." Finn's expression went through several rapid changes, confusion, then understanding, then fury. "You think I have been lying to you? You think I have been pretending this whole time? Why else would you be with me?" Violet demanded, her voice breaking. "Look at me. Finn, look at you. You are strong and handsome, and you could have any woman you wanted. Why would you choose me unless someone asked you to?" Finn stood very still for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "Who was it? Which men were talking?" "It does not matter. It matters to me." Finn's hands had curled into fists at his sides. It matters because they are wrong, and because I am going to make sure they know it. You do not have to defend me, Violet said tiredly. You can stop pretending now. I release you from whatever obligation you felt you owed to my uncle. Violet. Finn stepped closer, and there was something fierce in his eyes now, something that cut through her pain and made her look at him. I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear me. I am not pretending. I have never been pretending, not for a single moment since I walked into your aunt's parlor and saw you for the first time. Those men are fools, and they know nothing about what I feel or why I feel it. Then why would they say such things? Because men are idiots, especially when they are in groups and trying to look clever in front of each other. Because they saw me with you and they could not understand it, so they made up a story that made sense to their small minds. But their story is not true, Violet. The truth is that I love you. The truth is that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. The truth is that if I spend the rest of my life trying to prove that to you, it will be time well spent. Violet wanted to believe him. Every part of her wanted to believe him, but the doubt was there, poisonous and persistent. How can I know? How can I know you are not just very good at this, at making me feel special when it is all an act? Finn was silent for a long moment, and then he took her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it hammering beneath her palm, fast and strong. Do you feel that? That is what happens when I am near you. My heart races like I have been running for miles. When I look at you, I forget what I was going to say. When you smile, I feel like I could lift mountains. When you laugh, I want to spend the rest of my life finding ways to make you laugh again. That is not kindness, Violet. That is not obligation. That is love, pure and simple and true. Violet closed her eyes, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her hand, feeling the warmth of his body, feeling the truth of his words settling over her like a blanket. I am sorry, she whispered. I am sorry I doubted you. I'm just so afraid of being hurt. I know. Finn's voice was gentle again now, the fury drained away. And I'm sorry that you have been given reason to be afraid. But I'm asking you to trust me. Not blindly, not without question, but trust me enough to let me keep showing you how I feel. Trust me enough to believe that what we have is real. Violet opened her eyes and looked up at him, at this mountain of a man who had somehow seen her when no one else had, who had loved her when she had not believed herself lovable. I do trust you, she said. I am terrified, but I trust you. Finn pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Violet rested her head against his chest and let herself be held. They stood like that for a long time, while inside the dance continued, and the music played and the world went on without them. When they finally pulled apart, Finn said, I'm going back inside, and I'm going to find those men, and I'm going to make something very clear to them. You do not have to fight them, Violet said quickly. I'm not going to fight them. Finn's smile was grim. I'm just going to educate them. He took her hand and led her back inside, and he moved through the crowd with purpose until he found the group of men who had been talking. They looked up as he approached, their expressions shifting from surprise to unease as they saw his face. Gentlemen, Finn said, his voice carrying despite the music. I believe you were discussing my courtship of Miss Pemberton earlier this evening. I wanted to clarify a few things so there is no confusion. I am not with her out of kindness. I am not with her out of obligation. I am with her because she is the most remarkable woman I have ever met, because she is beautiful and talented and strong, and because I am in love with her. If any of you have a problem with that, you are welcome to discuss it with me privately. But if I hear another word of gossip or speculation about her, if I hear anyone suggesting that what we have is anything less than genuine, then we are going to have a much longer conversation, and it will not be pleasant. Are we clear? The men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, and then the one who had spoken first nodded slowly. We are clear, Finn. I apologize if we spoke out of turn. You did. Finn's voice was flat. And your apology is accepted, but only if it is followed by better behavior. He turned and led Violet away, and she could feel every eye in the room on them. But instead of feeling exposed, she felt protected. Finn had stood up for her, publicly and without hesitation, and that meant more than any private declaration could have. They left the dance soon after, walking back through the quiet streets to her aunt's boarding house. At the door, Finn took both her hands in his and said, "I am leaving the day after tomorrow. I need to get back to the mountains. But I am coming back, Violet. I'm coming back in the fall, when the first snows start, and I'm going to ask you to marry me. I am telling you this now so you have time to think about it, time to decide if that is what you want. But I want you to know that my mind is made up. I love you, and I want to build a life with you." Violet felt her breath catch. The fall? That is months away. I know. Finn looked pained. But I cannot ask you to come with me now. My cabin is small and rough, and it is no place for a woman who has her own work and her own life here. And I need time to make preparations, to build onto the cabin, to make it a home instead of just a shelter. When I come back, I want to have something to offer you, something real. You are already something real, Violet said softly. But I understand, and I will wait for you. You do not have to decide now, Finn said. About marrying me, I mean. Take the time. Think about what you want. If, when I come back, you tell me that you do not want to be my wife, I will accept that. I will not like it, but I will accept it. I already know my answer, Violet said, and she rose up on her toes and kissed him. But I will let you ask me properly in the fall. Finn laughed, a sound of pure joy, and he lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle right there on her aunt's porch. When he set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like children. I'm going to make you so happy, Finn promised. I'm going to spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are. I believe you, Violet said, and realized that she did. Finn left 2 days later, riding out of Utica with a pack mule and a string of horses he had bought with his pay from the cattle drive. Violet stood at the edge of town and watched him go, her heart aching with the distance already growing between them, but also full of hope for what would come. He turned in his saddle and waved, and she waved back, and then he was gone, disappearing into the golden hills. The months that followed were the longest of Violet's life. She threw herself into her work, taking on more commissions than usual, and she tried not to count the days until fall. Finn wrote her letters, long, rambling missives that arrived every few weeks, brought down from the mountains by other travelers. He wrote about his days, about the work he was doing on the cabin, about the things he saw and the things he thought. He wrote about missing her, about counting the days until he could see her again. Violet read each letter until she had memorized every word, and she wrote back with equal fervor, telling him about her life, her work, her dreams. Summer came hot and golden to Sacramento Valley, and Violet spent her evenings sitting on her aunt's porch, watching the sun set over the hills and imagining Finn watching the same sun from his mountain cabin. Constance fussed over her with delight, already planning a wedding that had not yet officially been proposed, and Uncle Bernard strutted around town taking credit for the match with shameless pride. In August, a letter arrived that made Violet's heart soar. Finn wrote that the cabin was nearly finished, that he had added 2 rooms and a proper kitchen, that he had built furniture with his own hands and was trying to make it all as comfortable as possible. He wrote that he was counting down the days, that he dreamed of her every night, that he could not wait to make her his wife. Violet took the letter to Mrs. Graham and gave her notice. I'm going to be married in the fall, she said. I'm going to live in the mountains with a man who loves me. Mrs. Graham smiled, a knowing sort of smile. I thought as much. You have been glowing like a lantern since that mountain man walked into your life. I am happy for you, Violet. Truly. The leaves began to turn in September, gold and red against the blue sky, and Violet began to prepare. She sewed herself a wedding dress, a simple design in cream-colored silk, with lace at the collar and cuffs. She packed her belongings, though she did not have much beyond her clothes and her sewing supplies. She wrote to Finn and told him she was ready whenever he was. October arrived with crisp mornings and the smell of wood smoke in the air. And on a bright afternoon, when the hills were painted in autumn colors, Finn rode back into Utica. Violet was in the dress shop when she heard the commotion outside, and she looked up to see him through the window, sitting tall on his horse, scanning the street with eager eyes. She dropped her needle and ran. She ran out of the shop and down the boardwalk and into the street, and Finn saw her and dismounted in one smooth motion. He caught her as she threw herself into his arms, and he lifted her and spun her and kissed her right there in the middle of Main Street, with half the town watching. "I missed you," he said against her hair. "God, I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Violet said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You are here. You are really here." "I am here," Finn set her down but kept his arms around her. "And I am not leaving without you. Violet Pemberton, will you marry me? Will you come up to the mountains and build a life with me? Will you be my wife?" "Yes," Violet said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it. Yes, forever." Finn kissed her again, slow and deep, and the watching crowd erupted in cheers and applause. When they finally broke apart, Violet saw her aunt and uncle standing on the boardwalk, both of them beaming with satisfaction. "We should get married soon," Finn said, "before the snows come. I want to get you home." "Home?" Violet repeated, tasting the word. "I like the sound of that." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance. Violet wore her cream silk dress and carried wildflowers that Finn had picked from the hills. Finn wore new clothes that Violet had tailored to fit his large frame, and he looked so handsome that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. But his eyes never left Violet, and when they spoke their vows, his voice was steady and sure. Uncle Bernard cried during the ceremony, large dramatic tears that he did not bother to hide. Constance cried as well, but more delicately, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Mrs. Graham attended with a smile of quiet satisfaction, and the cattlemen who had gossiped at the dance showed up and offered their congratulations with genuine warmth. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Finn and Violet danced together, their first dance as husband and wife, and Violet felt like she was floating. She was married. She was loved. She was starting a new life with a man who saw her, truly saw her, and thought she was beautiful. They left Utica the next morning, heading up into the foothills with a wagon loaded with Violet's belongings and supplies for the winter. The journey took 3 days, winding through valleys and over ridges, climbing higher into country that grew wilder and more beautiful with each mile. Finn pointed out landmarks and told her stories, and Violet absorbed it all with wide eyes and an open heart. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was more than Violet had dared to hope for. It sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a stream running nearby and mountains rising up on all sides. Finn had built it with care, the logs fitted tight and chinked with clay, the roof solid and steep to shed snow. Inside, there was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a new stove, and 2 smaller rooms for sleeping and storage. He had made furniture, a table, chairs, a bed frame with a mattress stuffed with sweet-smelling grass. There were shelves on the walls and rugs on the floor, and everything spoke of the work and thought he had put into making this place a home for her. "What do you think?" Finn asked, watching her anxiously as she moved through the rooms. "I think it is perfect," Violet said, and meant it. "I think it is the most beautiful home I have ever seen." They settled into their new life together with surprising ease. Finn taught Violet the rhythms of mountain living, how to read the weather, how to preserve food for winter, how to spot the tracks of different animals. Violet set up her sewing area by the best window and continued her work, taking commissions from the few families who lived in the high country and sending finished pieces down to Mrs. Graham with travelers. She also began designing her own patterns, experimenting with ideas she had never had time to explore before. The winter came early and stayed late, blanketing the mountains in deep snow, but the cabin was warm and well-stocked. Finn and Violet spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply being together. They made love with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and preferences, finding joy in the intimacy of shared space and shared life. In the spring, when the snow melted and the wildflowers bloomed, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Finn one morning as they sat on the porch watching the sunrise, and he whooped with joy and picked her up and carried her inside, and made love to her with such reverence that she cried from happiness. Their son was born in December, during the first major snowstorm of the winter. Finn delivered him with steady hands, though Violet could see the fear in his eyes, and when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Finn wept openly. They named him Dashiell, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's violet eyes. 2 years later, a daughter arrived. They named her Lorena, and she was plump and happy from birth, with curls that defied all attempts to tame them. Finn adored both his children with a fierce protectiveness, but he never let his love for them eclipse his love for Violet. He still looked at her the way he had that first day, with awe and wonder, and he still told her she was beautiful every single day. The years passed in the rhythm of seasons and hard work and deep contentment. Finn continued to work with horses and cattle, occasionally going down to the valley for the spring drives, and Violet continued her sewing, gaining a reputation for quality that brought her clients from as far away as Sacramento. Dashiell and Lorena grew strong and healthy in the mountain air, wild as young deer and twice as quick. When Dashiell was 7 and Lorena was 5, the family made the journey down to Utica for the Autumn Harvest Festival. It had become a tradition for them, this annual visit to the town where Violet and Finn had met, and they looked forward to it all year. The harvest dance was held in the same town hall where they had danced together for the first time, though the building had been expanded and improved over the years. Violet wore a new dress she had made specially for the occasion, a rich burgundy that fit her fuller figure beautifully. Finn wore the suit she had tailored for him years ago, let out a bit to accommodate the breadth of shoulders that had somehow grown even broader with age and work. They entered the hall hand in hand, with Dashiell and Lorena dancing around their legs, and Violet felt the familiar flutter of nerves at being in a crowd. But then Finn squeezed her hand and smiled down at her, and the nerves faded. They were here together, and that was all that mattered. Constance descended on them immediately, exclaiming over how much the children had grown, hugging Violet until she could barely breathe. Uncle Bernard shook Finn's hand and tried to take credit once again for their marriage, which had become a running joke over the years. Mrs. Graham appeared and admired Violet's dress and reported that the dress shop was doing well under the management of her new assistant. The band began to play, and couples moved onto the floor. Finn turned to Violet and bowed, just as he had all those years ago. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Hawthorne?" "You may, Mr. Hawthorne." They moved onto the floor together, and Finn pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together with the ease of long practice, their bodies knowing the steps without thought. Violet looked up at her husband, at this man who had changed her entire life with his unexpected love, and she felt her heart swell with gratitude and joy. Around them, other couples danced, and Violet noticed the way people watched them. But the watching was different now. It was not curiosity or judgment. It was warmth, affection, the kind of attention that came from seeing something that made people happy. The arranged strangers had become the town's fondest couple, the unlikely pair who had somehow found in each other exactly what they needed. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Violet said, "how lucky we both are. I think about that every day." Finn leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Every single day, I wake up and look at you and wonder how I got so fortunate." "We both took a chance," Violet said. "We both chose to believe in something that seemed impossible. Best decision I ever made." "Mine too." The music swelled and Finn spun her in a slow circle, and Violet laughed, the sound bright and free. Dashiell and Lorena were dancing nearby with other children, their faces flushed with excitement. The hall was warm with lantern light and full of people they had known for years, people who had watched their love story unfold and had celebrated each chapter with them. Later in the evening, when the children were tired and drowsy, the family made their way back to the boarding house where they were staying. They put Dashiell and Lorena to bed in the room Constance had prepared, and then Finn and Violet stepped out onto the porch, needing a moment of quiet after the noise and activity of the dance. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. Finn put his arm around Violet and pulled her close, and she leaned into his warmth. They stood like that for a long time, comfortable in their silence, watching the town settle into sleep around them. "Do you ever regret it?" Finn asked suddenly. "Leaving town, giving up the life you had here?" Violet turned to look at him, surprised. "Never. Not even once. Why would you ask that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy, that I have given you enough." Violet reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek. "Finn Hawthorne, You have given me everything. You have given me love and partnership and a family and a home. You have given me a life I never imagined I could have. I have never been happier, and I have never been more certain of anything than I am of my love for you." Finn turned his head and kissed her palm. "I love you, Violet. I have loved you since the moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die." "I know," Violet said, "and I love you the same way." They went inside eventually, climbing the stairs to their own room, and they made love slowly and quietly, mindful of the sleeping children nearby. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Violet traced idle patterns on Finn's chest while he played with her hair. "What do you think the children will be when they grow up?" Violet asked drowsily. "Dashiell will be a horseman," Finn said with confidence. "He has a way with them already. Lorena, I am not sure yet. She has your cleverness, your eye for detail. Maybe she will be an artist of some kind. Or maybe they will surprise us and become something neither of us expects. That would be fine, too." Finn's voice was heavy with sleep. "As long as they are happy and kind and true to themselves, I do not care what they become." Violet smiled in the darkness. "You are a good father." "I'm trying to be. I want to give them what I never had. Stability, love, a home that feels safe." "You had a hard childhood?" Violet asked gently. They had talked about Finn's past before, but only in general terms. "Hard enough," Finn said. "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by an uncle who saw me more as free labor than family. I left as soon as I was old enough and went to the mountains because that was the only place I felt free. I never thought I would have a family of my own, never thought I deserved it." "You deserve it," Violet said fiercely. "You deserve every bit of happiness, Finn. You are the best man I have ever known." Finn pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "We are good for each other. We see each other clearly, and we love what we see." "Yes," Violet agreed. "That is exactly it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and in the morning they woke to find Lorena had climbed into bed with them at some point during the night, her small body wedged between them, her thumb in her mouth even in sleep. Finn and Violet looked at each other over their daughter's head and smiled, speaking without words the shared language of contentment. They spent a few more days in Utica, visiting with Constance and Bernard, seeing old friends, letting the children run and play with the town youngsters. But by the end of the week, they were all ready to go home. The mountains called to them, the quiet and the clean air and the life they had built there. The journey back was slower with the children, but no less pleasant. They stopped frequently to rest and eat, and Finn taught Dashiell how to identify different types of trees, while Violet pointed out birds to Lorena. They told stories around the campfire at night and slept under the stars, and by the time they reached the cabin, they were all tired but happy. The years continued to unfold in their slow, sure way. Dashiell grew tall and strong like his father, and he spent his days working with the horses and learning the ways of the mountains. Lorena grew clever and creative, and she developed a talent for drawing and painting that delighted Violet. Both children were loved fiercely and raised with gentle discipline, and they thrived in the freedom of their mountain home. Finn and Violet grew older together, their bodies bearing the marks of time and hard work, their faces weathered by sun and wind. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened over the years, becoming something richer and more complex than the bright new passion of their early days. They knew each other completely, the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses, and they chose each other every single day. When Dashiell was 15, a young woman came to the high country with her family, homesteaders looking to make a new start. Dashiell took one look at her and came home with the same awestruck expression Finn had worn when he first saw Violet. Finn and Violet exchanged knowing glances and smiled. "He is too young yet," Violet said, "but in a few years." "In a few years we will probably be planning another wedding," Finn finished, and he sounded pleased rather than sad. When Dashiell did eventually marry the homesteader's daughter, he and his bride built a cabin a few miles away, close enough to visit often, but far enough to have their own space. Lorena showed no signs of wanting to marry, preferring instead to spend her time painting the mountains and valleys, selling her work to travelers and merchants who passed through. Violet and Finn entered their later years with grace, their hair going gray, their movements slower but still sure. They still made the annual trip down to Utica for the Harvest Festival, though now they sometimes rode in a wagon rather than on horseback. They still danced together at every dance, moving with the same easy synchrony they had developed over decades of partnership. One autumn evening, when the leaves were turning gold and the air had that particular clarity that comes only in October, Violet and Finn sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset. They were both in their 60s now, their faces lined with age, but their hands were still clasped together, their bodies still leaning toward each other with the unconscious magnetism of long love. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Violet asked, her voice soft in the quiet. "Every detail," Finn said. "I remember walking into that parlor and seeing you standing there and thinking that the world had just shifted on its axis. I remember not being able to breathe for a moment because you were so beautiful." "I thought you were lying," Violet said, smiling at the memory. "I thought you were the kindest liar I had ever met." "And now?" "Now I know you were telling the truth. You have never lied to me, not once in all these years." "I never will." Finn lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Violet Hawthorne. That has not changed." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The air was cool and smelled of pine and coming winter, and somewhere in the distance an owl began its evening song. "I'm so glad your uncle meddled," Violet said eventually. "I'm so glad your aunt conspired. I'm so glad we both said yes to that ridiculous blind arrangement." "So am I," Finn said. "Best thing that ever happened to me." "To both of us." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, bright and cold overhead, and then they went inside to the warmth of the cabin they had built together, to the life they had made, to the love that had sustained them through every season and every year. And as Finn banked the fire and Violet blew out the lanterns, they moved through the familiar routines of their shared life with the comfort that comes only from decades of practice and profound, abiding love. The story of how they met, the mountain man and the seamstress, the arranged meeting that had become the truest of loves, became legend in Sacramento Valley. People told it at weddings and dances, holding it up as proof that love could come from the most unexpected places, that beauty was more than skin deep, that taking a chance on connection could change everything. And in their cabin high in the mountains, Finn and Violet Hawthorne lived out their days in happiness, surrounded by family and held fast by the love they had built together. They had started as strangers, brought together by meddling relatives and circumstance, but they had become something much more. They had become partners, lovers, friends, and soulmates. They had become exactly what each other needed, and they spent every day grateful for the blind date that had opened their eyes to the most profound beauty of all, the beauty of being truly, completely, and perfectly seen. Their love story was not without its challenges, not without its moments of doubt and fear and difficulty, but those moments made the love stronger, deeper, more resilient. And when they were very old, sitting together on that same porch, watching the same mountains they had watched for so many years, they could look back on their life together and know with absolute certainty that they had lived well, loved well, and built something that would outlast them both. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the opinions of others, not the judgments of society, not the expectations they had each carried when they first met. What mattered was the love they had chosen, the life they had built, and the profound and simple truth that they had found in each other, everything they had been searching for without even knowing they were searching. It was a love born of vulnerability and courage, of seeing and being seen, of choosing each other every day despite and because of their flaws and fears. It was the kind of love that changed lives, that rippled outward in circles of influence and inspiration, that reminded everyone who witnessed it that beauty comes in infinite forms, and love is always, always worth the risk. And high in the California mountains, where the pine trees whispered secrets to the wind and the stars shone with impossible brilliance, Finn and Violet Hawthorne lived happily ever after, together until the very end and beyond. their love, written into the fabric of the mountains themselves, enduring as stone and as eternal as the turning of the seasons.